Let's have a word of prayer and we'll get started today, okay? Heavenly Father, we do thank you that we can meet again this morning to take a look at the life of Christ. We ask that you speak to each one of us as we go through these passages now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Turn over to Luke chapter 6. As always, we'll pick up where we left off last week. That's Matthew, Mark, Luke, yeah. Second book of Luke. We're going to go there, okay? Last week we took a look at Jesus returning to Galilee from Jerusalem. He'd been in Jerusalem for a Passover, and he had 3 encounters with the Jews regarding the Sabbath day and healing on the Sabbath and other things on the Sabbath day. And he had to put the Jews in the Jewish leadership in their place, which he did. Gave him a solid presentation of the gospel. And now he's back in Galilee, and last week we saw that he was being followed around by huge crowds of people that had come both from Jerusalem and Judea and also throughout the entire Holy Land, as far away as Tyre and Sidon, way up in the north. They were following him. He was healing everybody, casting out demons and such. And he'd also gone into a mountain to pray, and while there he'd asked his disciples to join him, and from them he picked 12 men to be his apostles, ones who would go before him and go preach the gospel and heal and such. The 12 that we know as the 12 original apostles, including Judas Iscariot. And then they came down from the mountain in chapter 6. We see this, Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 17. And he came down with them and stood in the plain in the company of his disciples and a great multitude of people out of all Judea and Jerusalem and from the sea coast of Tyre and Sidon, which came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And they were vexed with unclean spirits, and they were healed. And the whole multitude sought to touch him, for there went a virtue out of him, and he healed them all. So we see even when he comes down from the mountain, he comes to a plain, it's near Capernaum. And while he's there, the multitude is still there, and he's still healing people. And then we read in verse 19 this, verse 20, and he lifted up his eyes on his disciples and said, "Blessed be ye poor, for yours is the kingdom of God." And that begins what is known as the Sermon on the Plain. It sounds an awful lot like the Sermon on the Mount we looked at back earlier, several weeks ago. But it's not the same because he's in a different location. The Sermon on the Mount was obviously in a mountain. Here he's on a plain rather than in a mountain. They came down from the mountain. And also, the arrangement of the components, as we'll see as we'll go through this sermon, we're going to go through it. It's fairly short compared to the other one. The components are changed a little bit, and he's added a few things to it. So why would he be preaching the same sermon a second time? Many commentators suggest that this is the same sermon, just Luke's version of it. But I don't think so, because chronologically it's not the same. It's just not in the right place. So why would he be preaching the same sermon again? Well, why do we give the gospel more than once? Because that's what this sermon is. Basically, it's a presentation of the gospel. I think the reason that he's doing it here is that he has a new audience. That audience back in chapter 5. Well, turn over to Matthew chapter 4, if you would, just for a quick look of who was involved there. Matthew chapter 4, we see this, verse 25. And there followed him great multitudes of people from Galilee and from Decapolis, which is to the east of the Jordan River, and from Jerusalem and from Judea and from beyond Jordan. So the people from the east of Jordan and people down in the south and from around Galilee. But if you recall from last week, we looked at the list of people who are following him now. We see people, well, here he said from Tyre and Sidon, which is way far north. But also we see Edomians, people from way south, down what used to be Edom, down south of the Dead Sea. So he has a lot of people that weren't with him at that first sermon. And so now he's preaching the second sermon, I think, to give them the same message that they hadn't heard before. I mean, they're coming for the healing. But they should be coming for the gospel. Because for the Jews, they come together. They're for the same reason. They're actually... The promise that God gave them in Isaiah, that they'd have both the gospel and the healings together, it was a package deal for the Jews because they were his chosen people. So, what do we have here? Well, verse 20 is the sermon follows the same structure as the Sermon on the Mount. If you recall, the Sermon on the Mount had 3 parts. The first part was who is in the kingdom. That's the Beatitudes, blessed are, so on and so forth. But then the second section was the character of those people in the kingdom. It describes what do they have, what you have to be in the kingdom, the kind of character you need. And then finally, there was a challenge for people to join the kingdom. They have a choice. They can either be in it or out of it. It's up to them what they want to do with it. And that's what's going on here. And the first thing we're going to look at in verses 20 to 26 is the kingdom citizenship. Who is in the kingdom? Beginning in verse 20 again. And he lifted up his eyes on his disciples and said, now notice he's speaking to the disciples. But everybody, as we'll see at the end, is hearing this, okay? So he's addressing it to the disciples, but he wants everybody to hear it. So that's where we're going. And he says to the disciples and said, blessed be ye poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are ye that hunger now, for ye shall be filled. Blessed are ye that weep now, for ye shall laugh. Blessed are ye when men shall hate you, and when they shall separate you from their company, and shall reproach you, and cast out your name as evil for the Son of Man's sake. Rejoice ye in that day, and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven, for in the like manner did their fathers unto the prophets. So, basically a shortened version of the Beatitudes. If you recall, there was like 8 to 10 Beatitudes in Matthew 5. But here he says, blessed are the poor, are ye poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Over in Matthew, he says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Here, it sounds like he's making it economic. Blessed are the poor, no money, right? But in Matthew, he says, blessed are the poor in spirit. So I think he's speaking in shorthand here. It's the same idea. The poor will possess the kingdom. But then the next one, blessed are ye that hunger now, for ye shall be filled. Over in Matthew, he says, blessed are they that hunger and thirst after righteousness. And again, I think it's a bit of shorthand. It isn't just hungry for food, but they will be hungry for righteousness, because they will be filled. And then, blessed are ye who weep, for you, what does it say? You shall laugh. Over in Matthew, it says, blessed are they that mourn, for they will be comforted. Okay? Blessed are ye that weep, for you will laugh. Basically synonymous. And then the last one, blessed are ye when men shall hate you and when they shall separate you. That is, those who are persecuted for Christ's sake. For they have a great reward, he says, because just like their ancestors and their prophets had a great reward for being persecuted in their day, you will have a great reward in your day. And generally, it's the same thing that Matthew said. So, the citizens of the kingdom are poor, and they shall possess the kingdom. They're hungry, and they shall be filled. They weep now, they shall laugh. If they're persecuted now, which they will be, if they're any kind of Christian at all, they will have a great reward. So, basically, this is what you have as a citizen of the kingdom. But then he adds something in verses 24 to 26 that's not in Matthew. He talks about who is not a citizen of the kingdom. The citizen of the kingdom is poor, hungry, and weeping, and persecuted, and he will possess the kingdom, he will be filled, he will laugh, and he will have great reward. But who is not in the kingdom? Well, verse 24. But woe unto you that are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe unto you that are full, for you shall hunger. Woe unto you that laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe unto you when all men shall speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets. Here he's drawing a line in the sand for people who are in his audience, who think they already have everything that the kingdom has to offer, that they already have possession of the kingdom. They already are filled. They're already laughing. They already have their great reward. He's telling them, if you think you have great reward now, if you think that you're blessed now, if you think that you're filled now, the problem is you're not really understanding what it is to humble yourself before God. Because those who are in the kingdom know that they are lacking, and they must get their possession from God. They know that they're hungry for something. I'm missing something, and that God will fill them. They know that this life is a vale of tears, but God will wipe those tears away. And that they know that they're suffering for this kingdom's sake, and that God will give them a reward. Those who think that they're already rich and in the kingdom have some soul searching to do. Those who are already full of this life's blessings, they got some searching to do. They really got to check themselves out. If they're happy with their lives now, they really got to think about if this life is something you want to be happy about. If they are well spoken of by everyone, there might be an issue there. Why? Because if you are born again, if you are in the kingdom, you have a completely different mindset than the lost. And that's going to come into conflict with lost people at some point. It's just going to happen because you think differently than they do. You have a different heart desire than they do. And they're going to wonder about you and maybe even despise you. It's going to happen. If there's nobody disliking you as a Christian, you should be checking your faith. Jesus he's not wanting people to doubt their salvation. What he wants is check your life. Okay? Work out your salvation, what did Paul say? With fear and trembling. Not that you don't have salvation, but it's God that worketh in you, both to will and to do according to his good pleasure. And if you don't see fruit in your life, there's something you should be looking at. That's why he brings this up, because by this time, recall what we talked about the last few weeks, Jesus has been facing some serious persecution from the Pharisees, from the scribes, from all corners of traditional Judaism. And those people believe themselves to be righteous. They believe themselves to be in the kingdom. And they, I'm sure, at times would try to infiltrate and try to come to Jesus and try to be part of him for whatever, to show that they were, good enough. And he's pointing out to them, you're not good enough unless you're poor in spirit, unless you're hungry, unless you have these needs in your heart. You're not really in the kingdom because God isn't going to fill that. So he's trying to shake them up a little bit. He tells them who is a citizen and then who is not. Those who need to be checking themselves out here. But then verses 27 to 42, he talks about the character of the kingdom, and he breaks it down into two basic sections. First of all, true love in verses 27 to 35. And then he talks about true mercy in the second half from 36 to 42. True love. This is along the same lines as Matthew chapter 6. It's not talking about criminal action, but it's talking about personal offense and just basically the everyday bumps and bruises that we get in life, okay? The idea here is what Paul talks about in Romans 12:18. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. The idea is that a true kingdom citizen, his character will be to be at peace as much as possible with all men. Let me start in verse 27. But I say unto you which hear, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you, bless them that curse you, and pray for them which despitefully use you. The principle here is love your enemies. Specifically, what does he say? He says this, I say unto you which hear, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you. In other words, indeed, love your enemies. Be kind to those who do not like you. But then in word, verse 28, bless them that curse you. You should have blessing on your mouth for those who do not speak well of you. And then in your heart, what does it say? Pray for them that despitefully use you. You should be praying for those who hate you. Okay? You should be doing good to them. You should be blessing them. And you should be praying for them. That's true love. Love that loves its enemies. Then verse 29 through 31, we read this. And unto him that smiteth thee on one cheek, offer also the other. And him that taketh away thy cloak, forbid not to take thy coat also. Give to every man that asketh of thee, and of him that taketh away thy goods, ask them not again. And as ye would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise. The principle is to love your enemies. The practice, he lists here, the things that you should do specifically to follow through on that general principle. And again, it's referring to the everyday affairs of life that you run into, the problems you run into, that the kingdom citizen will run into. Remember, we talked about their character is different, their heart attitude and their thoughts are different. This is what you'll run into from those who are not in the kingdom. Turn your other cheek to the one who hits you. Offer your coat to the one who takes your cloak. In other words, if they take your outer coat, hand them your suit coat too, guys. Okay? And I say, well, I'll be freezing. Well, you got another coat, probably, if you're an American. If not, buy a blanket. No. Give to everyone who asks of you. Now, this is a little bit different. This isn't persecution in verse 30, but it's this statement. Give to every man that asketh of you. As long as you have means to do so and somebody asks something of you, don't hesitate because you're questioning their motives. You know what I'm saying? If somebody asks you for something, don't hesitate to give it to them without thinking about return. Now, I understand there's some wisdom that has to be there. If a guy you know is an alcoholic asks you for $5 because he's hungry and he needs groceries, offer to take him to the grocery store. Okay? Don't be stupid. But there are people who will ask you for something. They have a need, and you know that they have a need. Don't hesitate because you're afraid, well, he keeps asking, he's a bum, he doesn't have, all this kind of stuff. It says give to and don't worry about repayment, okay? Don't ask for return from those who take your goods. If somebody asks for something, they take it, or somebody borrows something, or somebody just takes something, don't seek reprisal from them. Don't make a big issue out of it. And then he says in verse 31, do to others as you would have them do unto you. That's the golden rule. We know this. It's repeated in a couple of the other Gospels. But the idea is that we should be treating everybody else the way we want to be treated. If you have a need and you ask for someone for help, you really want them to help you. So why would you not want to help somebody else who has a need? That's the whole point there. The purpose of this is in verses 32 to 34. Why should you do this? Why should you love your enemies? Why should you do unto others as you have them do unto you? For if ye love them which love you, what thank have ye? For sinners also love those that love them. And if ye do good to them which do good to you, what thank have ye? For sinners also do even the same. And if ye lend to them of whom ye hope to receive, what thank have ye? For sinners also lend to sinners to receive as much again. We should be doing this not because we expect to be paid, but because that's what God would do. If we're His children, we should be acting like His children. That's verse 35. But love ye your enemies, and do good, and lend, hoping for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and ye shall be the children of the highest, for He is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. If you're one of God's children, you should be reflecting His character. He shows mercy and kindness to everyone. He rains on the just and the unjust. Consequently, shouldn't we be raining on the just and the unjust also? Not thunderstorms with hail, giving to them, if you will. Basically, he says this: if you love your enemies, do good and lend without expectation, and then your reward will be great, and you will be God's child, since He is kind unto the wicked as well. Now, it's not saying that if you're kind to your enemies, you'll be a Christian. What it's saying is if you're a Christian, you'll be kind to your enemies. Don't get the cart before the horse. That's a really old analogy, but you know what I'm saying. Don't get things out of place here. We are supposed to be doing this because of who we are. We don't become who we are because of what we do. Okay? You're a Christian because you've trusted Christ, and you should live like a Christian. You don't live like a Christian to become one, is what I'm saying here. So, we should be loving everyone the way we would want to be loved and treated. Why? Because that's what we have as a character, as a kingdom citizen. But then verses 36 to 42, he talks about true mercy. Verse 36, we have the principle. Be ye therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. Now, he shows love to the just and the unjust. He shows love to everyone. He also shows mercy. Remember, every sinner deserves one thing: their sin. To spend eternity in the lake of fire. Anything else that we receive short of that is mercy from God. And the greatest mercy was what He offered to us so that we could get out of it entirely. That is salvation through Christ. So every person on earth, if they're not in hell right now, is getting mercy from God. The kind of mercy that we should be showing to people. Be ye therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. Don't make the other guy's life a living nightmare, okay? Basically. Be kind, be loving, be gracious. Give everybody else a little taste of heaven, is what he's saying. Why? What will draw people to Christ? Kindness, grace, and mercy. Yes, the gospel message is hard when somebody has to face the fact that they're a sinner and on their way to hell. But aren't we supposed to, speaking the truth in love? Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? Yeah, that's why. Be ye therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. Verses 37 and 38 tell us how we're supposed to practice this principle. Judge not, and ye shall not be judged. Condemn not, and ye shall not be condemned. Forgive, and ye shall be forgiven. Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, and shaken together, and running over shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that ye meet withal, it shall be measured to you again. What's he saying here? He's saying, well, judge not, and you won't be judged. One way that you show mercy is to not judge others for their behavior. And believe me, I know this from personal experience. It's so easy to judge those that I think are beneath me. And don't we always think at least one person on this planet is beneath us? So why do we judge them? Judge not. God doesn't judge them. Condemn not, and you won't be condemned. That's the next step beyond judging. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. It's interesting when you show kindness to others when they've wronged you, how they soften. Even the hardest person. I found this to be true. I've been in situations where I've been around people that are really, really adamant against Christianity. And if you're kind to them, they soften. They don't become your best friends by any means, but they soften up because they see that you're not kidding. Give, and it'll be given to you. If you're willing to follow through on this, God will supply your needs. Doesn't he supply all our needs according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus? That's what Paul said in Philippians. Well, part of that is us giving what we get. Because when we give, then we receive back. Why should we be giving so that we can receive? No, that's not the point at all. The point is we should be giving because it's our character to give. And we can rest on the promise that God will give back. Now, the purpose of all this is in verses 39 and 40. He spake a parable unto them. Can the blind lead the blind? Shall they not both fall into the ditch? The disciple is not above his master, but every one that is perfect shall be as his master. Now, this is a little parable that he brings up here that doesn't really seem to fit into the context. Because he's talking about how we shouldn't be judging, judge not lest you be judged, condemn not and you will not be condemned, forgive and you'll be forgiven, give and it'll be given back to you. Can the blind lead the blind? Shall they not both fall into the ditch? That doesn't really seem to fit the context. So what is he saying here? Well, he says this. In verse 39, he's saying basically a bad master will mislead his disciples. Can the blind lead the blind? Shall they not both fall into the ditch? In other words, if you're following bad teaching, if you have a bad teacher, somebody who's teaching you falsehood, what's going to happen? It's a blind man leading another blind man who's looking for the truth and not finding it. They're both going to end up in a ditch. They're both going to end up in disaster. In verse 39, or verse 40, the disciple is not above his master. What he's saying there is that you will always end up on an equal par with whoever you're following as your teacher. If you're following a bad teacher, you'll end up in the same position he'll be in. If you're following a good teacher, you'll end up in the same position he's in. But everyone that is perfect, that is complete, that is mature, shall be as his master. What is he saying? The disciple of a perfect master has the opportunity to be perfect like his master. So what he's saying is this. You can follow false teachers like the Pharisees and the scribes, and you'll end up just like them. Or you can follow what I'm telling you, said Jesus. And if you do, you'll have the opportunity to be just like me. Since your Father is perfect, if you're in the kingdom, what he requires of you will make you perfect. You have opportunity here. You say that you're following Christ. You have opportunity now to become like him by doing what he wants you to do. That's what it comes down to. Judge not. Why? Because he doesn't judge. He shows kindness and love to his enemies. If we do that, we'll be like him. That's the point of that parable. We are supposed to be like our master because we have that opportunity. And since our master is perfect, we can be perfect just like him. The proof of that appears in verses 41 to 42. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but perceivest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Either how canst thou say to thy brother, Brother, let me pull out the mote that is in thine eye, when thou thyself beholdest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, cast out first the beam out of thine own eye, and then shall you see clearly to pull out the mote that is in thy brother's eye. What's he saying? Well, he's saying this. Fault finding is foolish if you have faults. We're not supposed to judge. Why? Because we can be judged. We're not supposed to condemn because we have things that are worthy of condemnation. We should be setting our faults aside so then we can reach out and help others. Fault finding is foolish to those who have faults. But on the other side of the coin, verse 42, you can only help someone with his fault if you've dealt with your own fault first. In other words, if you're trying to be a blessing and a teacher and a leader of others to bring them closer to the truth, and you haven't examined yourself to lay yours aside, you're in no better condition than they are. You have not put yourself in a position of being like Christ so that you can help them like Christ would. Am I making sense here? Okay. We're supposed to have his character if we're in the kingdom. When we have that character, then we can be a blessing to others who are not in there, to bring them to the kingdom. But if we're trying to reach them with the kingdom and not living as if we were part of the kingdom, what are we doing to them? We're sending them a very confusing message. We need to be like him to be able to help others. That's what Jesus is saying here. So, citizens of the kingdom, they will realize that they need something from God, that they're limited in themselves. The character of those people, they'll have true love towards their enemies. They'll have true mercy towards all men because they'll be reflecting the character of the God who saved them. And then finally, in verses 43 to 49, we have his call. Beginning in verse 43. For a good tree bringeth not forth corrupt fruit, neither doth a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. For every tree is known by his own fruit. For of thorns men do not gather figs, nor of a bramble bush gather they grapes. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is evil. For of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaketh. Let's make sure I got all the verses read. Oh, and why call ye me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? He starts off this call with a little checkup. He presents a metaphor. Good trees don't present bad fruit, and bad trees don't produce good fruit. That's a standard principle. You don't expect to find rotten, lousy apples coming out of a healthy apple tree, and you don't expect good apples coming out of a nasty, withered tree that's diseased and filled with insects and such. You expect good to come from good and bad to come from bad. In the same way, men use that particular information in verse 44 to determine whether fruit's any good. For every tree is known by his own fruit. For of thorns men do not gather figs, and of a bramble bush gather they not grapes. Men seek fruit on the type of tree it is. What kind of conclusion can you draw from that? Well, quite simply, people will come to you if you have good fruit, and they'll avoid you if you have bad fruit. And where's that fruit coming from? Right here. Verse 45. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is evil. For of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. People can tell what kind of person you are by what kind of fruit you're producing. That's a fact. And why call ye me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? What is Jesus' summation there? Well, quite simply this. Calling Jesus Lord is not the same as having a good heart. You can still have a wicked heart and call Jesus Lord. over in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus talks about those who say, Lord, Lord. In that day, they say, Lord, Lord. And he doesn't let them into the kingdom. Why? Because he didn't know who they were. They were speaking his name, but not doing his works. There's an expectation of fruit bearing if you claim to be a citizen of the kingdom. Verses 47 to 49 sum it up. Whosoever cometh to me, and heareth my sayings, and doeth them, I will show you to whom he is like. He is like a man which built an house and digged deep and laid the foundation on a rock. And when the flood arose, the stream beat vehemently upon that house and could not shake it, for it was founded upon a rock. But he that heareth and doeth not is like a man that without a foundation built a house upon the earth, against which the stream did beat vehemently, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. The citizen of the kingdom has a certain character about him. He knows that he's poor in spirit, and he knows that God will provide, will give him the kingdom. He knows that he's hungering for something, and God will fill him, and so on and so on. And once he has that citizenship nailed down, then he will have true love. He will love his enemies. He will love his friends, of course, but he will also love those who do not love him back. He will show mercy to those who are unmerciful. Why? Because that's the character of the God that he has believed in. If he doesn't reflect that character, there is a problem in his life. And we won't go into that right here. This isn't a time to be trying to convince you that you're not born again. That's not my point here. My point is that there is something that should be in our lives if we're Christians. Kingdom citizens should live a certain way. And if we're not, that's because there's something in our hearts that isn't quite where it needs to be. And we need to get that straight. That's the whole point of Jesus' message here. It's the same point that he had before, just in a much longer form. Okay? If you're a citizen of the kingdom, you should live like one. And if you're not, you got a choice to make. Then we read this in verse 1 of chapter 7. Now, when he had ended all his sayings in the audience of the people, he entered into Capernaum. So he was near to Capernaum at this time, which is it's the main city in the Galilee region. It's on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And verse 2, and a certain centurion's servant, who was dear unto him, was sick, and ready to die. And when he heard of Jesus, he sent unto him the elders of the Jews, beseeching him that he would come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they besought him instantly, saying that he was worthy for whom he should do this, for he loveth our nation, and he hath built us a synagogue. So, we see Jesus returning to Capernaum after the sermon, and we don't really know anything else about this, except that it happened immediately after that sermon on the plain. And a centurion comes to him, asking if he'd heal his servant. Now, a centurion was a Roman soldier who was in charge of 100 other soldiers. He's basically a captain of a regiment. Also, because he's a Roman officer, he was not a Jew. He is a Gentile. But he has a particularly interesting background. Verses 3 through 5, one more time. And when he heard of Jesus, he sent unto him the elders of the Jews, beseeching him that he would come and heal his servant. Now, at this point, there's a little discrepancy between Luke chapter 7 and Matthew chapter 8. If you want to just hold your place in Luke 7 and turn over to Matthew 8, I want to show you something here. Matthew chapter 8, beginning in verse 5. And when Jesus was entered into Capernaum, there came unto him a centurion, beseeching him, and saying, Lord, my servant lieth at home, sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. And Jesus saith unto him, I will come and heal him. Okay? So, the same story, but a little bit different reading here. In the case in Matthew, it says that the centurion personally came to Jesus and asked him to do this. Over in Luke, though, it says this. And when he, the centurion, heard of Jesus, he sent unto him the elders of the Jews. In other words, the centurion didn't come over in Luke. He actually sent the elders of the Jews from Capernaum to come and talk to Jesus. So, who made the request? Well, over in Matthew, of course, it says that the centurion did it himself. Luke says that the centurion sent the Jews. What's going on? What's the difference here? Well, when representatives came to Jesus for the centurion, they were acting on the centurion's behalf. What they were saying to Jesus was what the centurion would have said if he'd been there in person. Matthew was just cutting to the chase and saying the centurion sent this message. The centurion came to him and told him. Luke he's giving us the greater details that, yes, he did come to him, but he came to him in the person of these Jewish leaders who gave him the same request. Come and heal my servant. But additionally, Luke provides us a little more background on this. Well, first of all, why would there be this discrepancy, and why would the centurion not come himself? Well, I think that what's going on here is this. The centurion was not an idiot. He could not be an idiot and be the head of 100 men, though I'm sure somebody in the military would perhaps disagree with that. But the point remains is that he understood the Jews. The Romans, despite the Romans had one thing going for them in their empire. They understood how to keep the peace. Because that's what they wanted in their empire, Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. They wanted peace throughout their kingdom. They didn't care what the people that they subjugated did with their free time. As long as they paid their taxes and behaved themselves orderly, they didn't care. And so there were a lot of Roman soldiers in Israel. I've mentioned this in the past. They were there because the Jews didn't like to have anybody occupying their country. And so there was constantly rioting and conspiracies and all this kind of stuff. The Romans. A wise Roman would know that he needed to do what he could to keep the peace. This centurion, stationed in Capernaum, knew to keep the peace would be to befriend the Jews. Be kind to them, be gracious to them. Now, he's not a born-again man as far as we can tell, but, well, we'll get to that in just a second. But he is treating the Jews as he would want to be treated. He's showing them grace and kindness. And so when he makes this request for his servant, he also knows that the Jews have a hard time with Gentiles. He has gained the trust of these Jewish leaders in Capernaum, but he doesn't know Jesus. And he knows how the Pharisees are, and he knows how the teachers are, and how the Jews are towards Gentiles. They would treat them, well, we'll get to another story, but generally they treat them like dogs because they view Gentiles as dogs. So he didn't want to go directly to Jesus himself, so he sent these friends of his that were Jewish leaders because they knew how to talk to Jesus. And he figured they could better explain the situation to him. Because a Gentile just coming out of the blue and talking to Jesus, the odds are pretty much stacked against him in his mind. Okay? That's why I think that he sent them instead. And again, Matthew gives us a shorthand version of it, but Luke is giving us the actual facts here. The centurion's message was, my servant is at the point of death from paralysis. Matthew 8 mentions that. But then in Luke 7, verses 4 and 5, it says this, and when they came to Jesus, that's the Jewish leaders, they besought him instantly. They told him the message. And then they said this, that he was worthy for whom he should do this. For he loveth our nation, and he hath built us a synagogue. Now, was this in the centurion's? Perhaps the centurion thought this too. They could sell it, but the Jewish leaders here are selling it. Why? Because they want to keep the Roman centurion happy. He's been good to them. And in the Jewish leadership's mind, they were always, okay, just to go back to what we just talked about, that sermon on the plain, they were always made it a point to be kind to their friends. Why? Because their friends would pay them back. Additionally, if somebody was kind to them, they made it a point to find a way to pay them back. Why? Because it was always tit for tat. He's a friend of mine. He paid me something. I got to pay him back. So they're thinking to themselves, this centurion has done wonderful kindnesses to us. Let's go talk to Jesus in hopes that he will help us pay him back because of his kindness. So they told him, look, he's worthy. When a Jew would use the word worthy, they were saying this man has a part in the kingdom. Now, for a Jew to say that about a Gentile was a real choker. But had he converted to Judaism? Possibly. Hard to say. At the very least, he was friendly to the Jews. But then it says that he built us this synagogue. Apparently, he was a fairly wealthy centurion because he chipped in the money to build a synagogue. And that synagogue, I mentioned this several weeks ago, The synagogue at Capernaum was the place where Jesus preached when he was there, and he healed that demoniac. This is that particular synagogue. It was a fairly large building, okay? It could easily seat 300 people. This guy paid for that for them. So they're saying, he's done good works for us. We owe him something. Now, verses 6 through 8, we see this. Then Jesus went with them, and when he was now not far from the house of the centurion, sent friends to him, saying unto him, the centurion sent friends unto him, saying, Lord, trouble not thyself, for I am not worthy that thou shouldest enter under my roof. Wherefore neither thought I myself worthy to come unto thee, but say in a word, and my servant shall be healed. For I also am a man set under authority, having under me soldiers, and I say unto one, Go, and he goeth, and to another, Come, and he cometh, and to my servant, Do this, and he doeth it. Jesus offered to come to his house, and was heading that way, when the centurion, sent messengers to say, Please, don't come to my house. And he says, I'm not worthy for you to come under my roof. You're a great teacher, and I am a lowly Roman centurion. And then he also said, I am not worthy that thou shouldest, wherefore neither thought I myself worthy to come unto thee. What's going on here? Well, it may be the fact that he realized that the Jews would think that he was a dog, a Gentile dog. But also, I think he has already trusted in Messiah as a Gentile. How is that possible? Well, we see it in the Gospels. It's very little evidence of it, but it's there. There are Gentiles getting saved in the Gospels. If you recall from, I believe it was last week, we talked about that prophecy of Isaiah, talked about in him the Gentiles would trust. The gospel was coming for the whole world. The Jews thought it was just for them. But God's intention was for everyone to get saved. And to see a Gentile having faith in the Jewish Messiah was not out of the question. And I think that's why he said that I was not worthy to come to you. Why? Because I don't deserve anything from you. He was poor in spirit. He was hungering for something. He was in the kingdom. Now, in verse 9, when Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him and turned him about and said unto the people that followed him, I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. Over in Matthew 8, we read this about this. Verses 11 and 12. And I say unto you that many shall come. Verily I say unto you, I have not found so great a faith, no, not in Israel. And then Jesus says this as well. And I say unto you that many shall come from the east and west, and shall sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the children of the kingdom shall be cast out into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now he's saying this in the presence of the Jewish leaders of Capernaum, who have allowed Jesus to speak in their synagogue, who are coming to intercede for this Roman centurion who's been a friend to them, that he would come and heal his servant. And he's telling them, based upon what the centurion said, that you don't have to come to me because I know what it's like to be an authority. I command people to go places and they do what I say. Consequently, Jesus, I know you can, with a word, command my servant to be healed, and he'll be healed just like that. Jesus was amazed at this man's faith and said, I have not seen this kind of faith in Israel. The implication being Israel should have that kind of faith, and they didn't. And then that remarkable statement in verses 11 and 12, many shall come from the east and the west and shall sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, but the children of the kingdom won't. The children of the kingdom, in the Jewish mind, were themselves. Israel is the kingdom of God. They are in the kingdom, and they will be with God forever. Jesus is saying, no. It's faith that gets you into the kingdom. This guy has the faith. Many from east and west, not Israel, but east and west will come and be in the kingdom with your patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But you, Abraham's descendants, won't be there. Why? Because you don't have the faith of this centurion. He knows what it means to trust me. You do not. You're coming and begging for him because he's done you a favor. He's coming because he trusts that I can do it. There's a big difference between payback and faith. The centurion has the faith. And so what happens? Well, back over in Luke chapter 7, and they that were, I say unto you that, and they that were sent, returning to the house, found the servant whole that had been sick. In other words, he was healed at that point. Again, over in Matthew chapter 8, we read this in verse 13. And Jesus said unto the centurion, Go thy way, and as thou hast believed, so be it done unto thee. And his servant was healed in the selfsame hour. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the servant was healed, and the Jewish leaders would have known about this, but also they would have walked away with a really strong rebuke because he didn't heal him until after he'd told them off. You won't have the kingdom because you don't have the faith of the centurion. I just healed the servant. Just think what you could have had, Jews, if you trusted me. And I think we'll stop there for today. Let's pray, shall we? Heavenly Father, we do thank you so much for this story of faith and for this sermon on the plain. Lord, I pray that if there's someone here who has not trusted in you or has a question about their faith or about their life that they're living as a Christian, that they would seek someone out today to get things right with you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.